Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 5th episode in a series of webinars presented by the Armenian Bar Association's Young Lawyers Committee. Each panel discussion focuses on one emerging development in the area of law, and today's topic will be non-fungible tokens. Past webinars have been about blockchain and crypto, climate change, cybersecurity, the environment, and cannabis law. You can find these videos on the Armenian Bar's YouTube channel, which is linked through the ABA's website. My name is Gazaryan, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm a senior account manager at Kapitus, a fintech company specializing in providing financing for business owners. I also volunteer with the Armenian Bar Association on its task force for human rights and the environment. I am proud to introduce our speakers for this evening, Raffi, Teperdjian, and Nareg, Essaghoolian. Although NFTs are a relatively recent phenomenon, Raffi and Nareg have extensive work with their clients at their respective firms in this exciting new area. As an associate at Cooley law firm, Nareg focuses on general corporate law. He represents both private and public companies in a range of industries, as well as providing services in venture financing for his investor clients. His areas of expertise include entity formation, organization and governance matters, mergers and acquisitions, and public offerings. Raffi is an intellectual property litigation associate at Ropes & Gray law firm. Raffi's practice includes the intersection of blockchain and emerging technologies with intellectual property, financial technology, data privacy, and cybersecurity. Raffi has published articles discussing the regulation of blockchain by the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, proposing options for United States cybersecurity, regulation of smart contracts, and studying the national security implications of cryptocurrency financing. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I think. Great. So after reviewing the basics about NFTs, we'll hear from our panelists about how IP rights apply to these digital assets, and later we'll move to privacy and cybersecurity concerns. Then we'll talk about the question of regulation, and we'll hear more about the specific work with NFTs that Raffi and Nareg have done and how lawyers who wish to become involved in this area of legal practice could go about doing so. Finally, and of course, we'll talk about blockchain and its current and potential relevance in Armenia. Time permitting, we'll open it up to audience questions at the end of the program, but that being said, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to send me over any questions that you may have in real time, and we'll go ahead and direct them at Raffi and Nareg as they go ahead and present for us. So we'll get started with a question for you, Raffi. What is blockchain? What's an NFT, and what does fungible even mean?
Well, thanks so much for the warm welcome, Diana. I do see that some people are saying that they're not able to see your screens, so you may want to fix that. But while we try to fix that, I mean, we can start chatting. It says that you're sharing full screen, but I see a blank screen as well.
You see the main screen?
I just see a black screen. I think that's what everyone's saying.
Let me stop and try to start again. But in the meantime, you can go ahead and start answering questions.
Sure. So, I mean, first, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and also thank you to the ABA for giving us a chance to speak. But you know, NFTs, at least from my perspective, it's kind of just another one of these terms that initially was thrown around in kind of the blockchain sphere, where they all just kind of start to initially blur together. So when Nareg and I were kind of discussing how we wanted to kind of talk through this topic, we thought that maybe a good way to start was kind of center people by explaining, well, first, before you even get into NFTs and cryptocurrencies and all that, you know, what is the underlying technologies that enable all this stuff, and really what is blockchain, right? So blockchain really is it's not really a new technology, arguably. It's kind of an amalgam of several different types of existing technologies that, when combined together, create this new thing, which is essentially a cryptographic, a secure way of storing information in a different way than a database, but kind of accomplishing the same type of thing, storing information. So when you're talking about how that information is stored, there's really, 4 different components that together combine to create a blockchain. And those are 4 kind of well-known technology, or I guess more well-known than blockchain technologies that have been around for a while. The first being something called public-private key encryption. The second being another type of encryption called hash values. And then another kind of mathematical property called a Merkle tree, and then peer-to-peer networking. And I'll briefly talk through each of these with the caveat that I'm an attorney, I'm not a cryptography expert or anything like that. But the best way to kind of visualize these technologies is through kind of an analogy of, say, a bank ledger. When you're looking at, say, you log into your bank account and you see different debits and credits. So first, we're talking about public-private key encryption, right? With public-private key encryption, you're basically taking information. Oh, the screen's coming up. So this will be easier to talk through with the visual. Because I know it's just a bunch of different terms being thrown around without the visual. I think it's, so this first screen just kind of is just some general information on the NFT market, which Nareg will get into later, but just kind of showing the explosive growth of the market over the years. In 2018, you have market cap of 40 million, and all the way ending in 2021, where it's in just the first quarter was $2 billion. There's been some decline maybe in that, but it's continuing to evolve over time. But jumping over to, if you go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of what we were just talking about, that you have these 4 different technologies that together create a blockchain, right? So, and we were talking about the analogy of a bank ledger. So if you're talking about a bank ledger, right, each transaction in the bank ledger, if you take that and use public-private key encryption to encrypt those entries, right, you're basically taking the amount, say $100 or whatever, and throwing it into this mathematical formula that basically spits out gibberish, unless you have the mathematical key to reverse the encryption and unlock the formula, right? So that's the first step of blockchain, where you have each of these transactions on a bank account, for example, that are encrypted on their own, right? So there's an individual key for each of these encrypted transactions, right? On their own, that's cool, that's great, but that doesn't really create a chain of information. It's just individually encrypted items, which has plenty of uses, but for blockchain, there needs to be more that's done, right? So then once you have each of those items individually encrypted, you move to the next type of encryption, which we were just talking about, which is called hash values. And it's just another type of mathematical function that encrypts things in a similar way, but it's different than public-private key encryption. And what you're doing there is you're taking each of those individually encrypted entries, and you're linking them together into one giant additional piece of encryption through this hashing algorithm. So you're basically taking each of those entries, turning them into gibberish, and then taking all that gibberish and throwing it into more gibberish, which makes them all linked together in one giant encrypted chain of transactions, right? And we're using this as we're using a bank analogy because the thought is that it's kind of relatable, but it really doesn't have to be bank transactions. It could be it could be anything really, any kind of entries in some kind of a ledger, right? So now you have the only way to access this information is to unlock it with the key to the hashing values and individually the public-private keys. Now, then that type of encryption and decryption every time you want to make a change to the ledger can become very resource intensive. So there's this concept called Merkle trees, which essentially makes this encrypting and decrypting more efficient. And again, I don't know all the details behind the math, but that's kind of how it works. So it just creates it in a way that it can actually function as a usable system. And then lastly, as if all that encryption to create some level of security wasn't enough, you also have this concept of redundancy in terms of peer-to-peer networking, which means that instead of having each of those entries linked together, encrypted in one central location, you have a network where each of the computers that support that network have a carbon copy of the entire ledger from the beginning to the end that are linked together, so that if you wanted to change the ledger, if you wanted to attack the system, for example, you wouldn't just have to convince one computer that your hacked version of the technology was incorrect or was the correct version. You'd have to convince a majority of the computers to that all the, so it's basically if you hack one of those systems and you say like, see, like look network, like this is the correct version of the ledger, where I have $10 million in my bank account. Well, like maybe 50 other computers that support the network in this peer-to-peer network are going to say, well, how come 49 of the other ones say that's not the case, right? So that's kind of another level of security here. So that's kind of blockchain in a nutshell, and I know that's a lot of terminology and things being thrown out at once, but hopefully that just gives you the gist of it. Now that you have the concept of what the components of a blockchain are, then you can kind of get into, well, what are the different applications of blockchain, right? And the reality is that there's so many of them beyond just Bitcoin, which is really just a type of cryptocurrency, which is a cryptocurrency is really just kind of a financial use of blockchain technology. But then, arguably smart contracts is almost another type of form of using blockchain. And then you get into this concept of non-fungible tokens. So you can see there, we just list out, some of these applications that blockchain can use for: digital currency, store of value, smart contracts, non-fungible tokens, and then this whole area of decentralized finance, which kind of overlaps into NFTs and all this other stuff. So then moving on from here, this kind of just shows, there's over 50 real world use cases of blockchain application that already exist in some form today, right? So, and it's just growing over time. In the beginning when blockchain came out, people would be like, well, what is it good for? What's it used for? It didn't have that many uses in the beginning, but you can see in a very rapid period of time over the course of, 5-10 years, it's grown exponentially and it's continuing to grow. So moving on from here, now that we have the concept of blockchain, we can kind of talk about NFT specifically, right? So whereas when I say a traditional type of blockchain application, I'm usually referring to something like a cryptocurrency or smart contract, right? Which I'm going to contrast here with an NFT. So with a traditional type of cryptocurrency, generally, you have most of the application existing on the blockchain, right? And that means that most of what's going on is occurring within this encrypted, universe of technologies that we were just talking about: public private key encryption, hash values, and all that. Whereas with NFTs, with non-fungible tokens, a lot of times the content that is being referenced by the non-fungible token is actually linked off of the blockchain. So I should take a step back and just say, like, in general, what is an NFT, right? Like it says there, it's a unique digital asset whose ownership is recorded through a blockchain, right? But not stored on the blockchain. I think if we go to the next slide, we talk about fungible versus non-fungible tokens. So a good way to compare and contrast it is, I know, there's this question of what is non-fungible, what is fungible, right? Fungible really just means interchangeable, right? So when you're talking about some applications of blockchain, like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and smart contract applications, fungibility is essential in order for it to work. Because say, for example, you're using blockchain as like a form of currency, right? Like you want currency to be interchangeable. You don't want the dollar that I give you to be different than the dollar that you give me, because that doesn't create like a very liquid system, right? So all that to say, those fungible forms of blockchain applications like cryptocurrencies, like the more traditional cryptocurrencies we were just talking about, Bitcoin and whatnot, they do have, valid use cases. But there's also valid use cases for this other type of concept called non-fungible tokens. So, just like how we were saying, there's fungible, there's tokens that are interchangeable. Non-fungible tokens are kind of meant to a great extent to be not interchangeable. You want each of them to be unique because there's certain use cases that make it valuable, for them to be unique. If you have a unique piece of art, for example, and you want it to be linked to something on a blockchain, you don't want that piece of art to be interchangeable with another one, right? Like you want valid ownership of it. And I know Nareg is going to get into this a little bit more in the next slide, but if you have, say, the title to property of a house on a blockchain, right? Like you don't want your title of property to be interchangeable with another one, right? Like because someone, you own your house, someone comes up to you and says, well, no, actually I own your house. I have another piece of property that's, a title that's fungible with yours. Like, no, that's not going to work, right? So non-fungible tokens, are meant to be used in these applications where it's valuable to be able to uniquely identify something by storing it in a blockchain. So I guess I can pause there for if I don't know if there's questions or anything like that, or if we can move to the next one, next slide, and we'll take it from there for the next one.
Awesome, Raffi. I know I asked you a question that people write a whole book about, but thank you for condensing it for us here. Next question for you, Nareg. What are the real or expected benefits of NFTs, and are there any development costs associated?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you guys for a great intro. And sorry about the tech issues, but hopefully everyone could see these slides. So what most people right now, you probably see in the media with NFTs is collectibles and digital art and even music, and gaming. So right now, digital art in NFT form is really kind of taking over as far as the mainstream use cases. It's going to take a little bit more time, but NFTs do have value for real world assets too, not just digital art or digital collectibles. Like Raffi kind of spoke about a little bit, property deeds. Right now, you have to have a third party kind of verify deeds and make sure there's no liens on or your actual owner of the property and all of that. The way NFTs kind of help make that more secure is that on the blockchain, it makes your ownership secure and immutable, which means it can't be changed. It's permanently on there until the next transaction. Another case is supply chain verification. I know like a lot of people are into designer shoes, Jordans, things like that. One use case you can imagine is there's a lot of counterfeit products out there. If you attach an NFT to each physical product and it gets scanned at each point in the supply chain, and let's say you eventually buy the pair of shoes and the NFTs get scanned, date stamped that you received them on this day, the next time you want to sell it or on eBay or whatever, someone could just check the blockchain and make sure that you're the actual owner of this product, scan it against the NFT that you have, and boom, it's like, all right, I know this is real and it's not counterfeit. And just kind of a couple charts to show you guys how popular things have gotten. We're in Q2, it really blew up with NBA Top Shot. You've probably heard about that if you're into sports. CryptoPunks is one of the art collections that became also very popular. So you could see sales weekly are pushing a couple $1 million weekly into the hundreds of millions. And here you could see the exchanges or platforms that sell NFTs, how they're doing by volume. So OpenSea is the top exchange right now where you could buy and sell and even mint NFTs. We're looking, as of July 1st, it was at 671 million for lifetime volume. I know it's passed over 1 billion now. And just to compare, in 2018, they had less than 500,000 in volume. So it's, had explosive growth this year. Now to talk a little bit about the costs associated with NFTs, because I'm sure some people are wondering, how can I get in on this? How much does it cost? How do I do this? Well, the good news is that minting generally doesn't cost much money depending on the gas fee. The gas fee is something that is different for each blockchain. It's talked a lot about for Ethereum because recently it's been kind of prohibitively high. So what the gas fee is basically the fee that the peer-to-peer network charges to verify your transaction. And minting your NFT, putting the digital verification on the blockchain is considered a transaction. So if you go on OpenSea, you'll see that minting your own art is free, but you do have to pay the gas fee. On Ethereum in Q2, when there was a ton of transactions going through, that was reaching hundreds of dollars. So it can get expensive that way, but that's why there's competitors coming out now. You might have heard of Solana, that is usually much cheaper. So the thing about NFTs, which makes it a little bit more confusing, is you could put an NFT, mint it on any blockchain that allows you to with smart contracts. So there's Ethereum, Solana, so on and so forth that you could look into, but Ethereum is the market leader. You could think of Ethereum as like Facebook and the other chains, kind of like startup social media companies that are trying to beat them out, basically. So then the fees that are charged to you by OpenSea is when you do decide to actually sell it and someone does purchase it, they'll take a 2.5% fee. And the cool thing that you can do is you can also set up royalties. So you can attach, it's basically a contract where every time it gets sold, a certain percentage gets returned to your crypto wallet. So you can, as long as your art is being sold, you're going to keep making money off of it. If you want to go on OpenSea and buy an NFT from a collection, you'll see something called a floor price. That's basically the lowest price available right now for one of the pieces. So yeah, that's sort of the costs on a broad level.
So I'm going to pause briefly for a question from one of the audience members. Harach asks, what does minting mean, Nareg?
Yeah, sorry, that's a good question. So minting is basically putting your NFT on the blockchain. That's minting it. So the NFT, like Raffi explained, is digital verification and like authenticity that you own a certain piece of art, or at least the NFT. So minting that means putting that information on the blockchain, essentially.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Raffi, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about ownership rights now. So do IP laws apply to NFTs, and does purchasing an NFT transfer IP rights?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think something that I think well, do we want to show like this concept first before we jump into the IP privacy stuff?
Sure.
Yeah. I can answer the question generally now, and then get back into it when we get to the slide on it. But there's just because something exists in like digital form, I mean, there's plenty of other things. There's songs, there's all kinds of intellectual property that exists, right? So there are IP rights that go with NFTs, but the question is, to what extent? To what extent is it that you're outright purchasing this item, or is it that it's something that's supposed to be licensed? And I'll get back to that in a second, but what we were talking about when we were setting up the presentation was that after we kind of talked through the concepts that create an NFT and how we distinguish it from a cryptocurrency, it might help to kind of visualize it in real time, to kind of speculate like how businesses may use this in the future, and how consumers may use them. And then, that'll probably spring forth some questions about these legal issues, including IP rights. So there's this concept of, the metaverse, which is kind of becoming more prevalent in like the social lexicon, which is kind of this idea of this like shared collective digital space where people, virtually live and work and play. And I mean, there's a lot of like movies that that portray it. I've actually never seen it, but I heard Ready Player One is kind of like one example of a recent movie that kind of portrays it, or like Tron. You know, it's like a digital world, right? So in the digital world, there's already digital worlds that exist, like Sims, and I think there's one called Second Life. You know, and then there's like even like ones like World of Warcraft, right? So the question is, what do NFTs bring to this kind of world, and that doesn't already exist, right? And the best way to kind of talk through it is through like an example. So, you know, say you go to the store today, right? And you buy a shoe, you know, like this Nike Air Force One over here, right? So in the future, or even today, really, you know, that physical item could come with an NFT, right? Now that NFT could represent ownership of the physical shoe, and you think to yourself, well, if you have a physical shoe, why does that matter? But you know, it could have a use. It also could come with the digital representation of the shoe, right? And so you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, if I have the real shoe, why do I want the digital shoe? And you know, it's really first to kind of understand why that has any value. You have to think about how like the digital world is growing in everyday life, right? So if you buy that physical shoe and you get an NFT that comes with it, that NFT is verifiably a scarce item, right? It's a unique item on the blockchain. There's not another one like it, right? Like there could be 50 Nike Jordans linked to 50 different NFTs, but each of those represents a different Nike Jordan, right? And so if you take that concept and you say, okay, what can we do with it? You could say when you buy that shoe, you get an NFT that comes with it, and it goes into like a video game, like NBA 2K, for example, right? And so you could equip that specific shoe onto your avatar, right? And like now, yes, you can have players where you can customize them and they can wear a shoe, a Nike shoe, but this would be different in the sense that it's one of a verifiable scarce amount of them, which arguably creates additional value for them, right? And then there's also this concept that's kind of emerging with the metaverse and decentralization in general of portable blockchains, interoperable blockchains, right? Where you could take that same NFT and also apply it to equip a character in another online world, like the Sims, right? So maybe your Sim also can wear that same cryptographically unique and verifiable Nike shoe, right? And then this is where it starts to get even weirder, is you could potentially use that NFT to, you know, impose it on an image of, say, yourself on Instagram, right? And you think to yourself, well, why would this be valuable? You know, why wouldn't I just wear the Nike shoe? Well, suppose the NFT that you buy is not associated with this physical item that you can afford, right? Suppose you're watching the Oscars or something, and someone wears a really nice suit or a dress that's, you know, by some super high-end designer, it costs like $50,000. You're not going to be able to necessarily afford that. I can't afford that. Or even if you can't afford it, maybe there's only one of that suit that exists. But suppose that they also issue, that designer also issues digital copies of that suit or that dress, right? In the form of an NFT. You could purchase that NFT, and with technology that's already existing today, you could superimpose it onto, say, an image of yourself or onto a digital avatar, and people could buy and sell these things in one of these NFT marketplaces that Nareg was speaking to. And again, I threw a lot of jargon at you guys, but I think the best way to kind of put it into your minds what we're talking about is just pulling up the link that we have here for this site, where there's organization that's already doing this superimposing of NFTs onto people. So Diana, if you want to pull it up real quick.
I'm trying to pull it up right now. Can you guys see it or no?
No. It's actually Nareg sharing his screen.
Nareg screen. Oh, okay. I also had it pulled up just in case. But if you, You said you do have it pulled up, Nareg, or no?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. We're still, oh, there we go.
Here we go.
Okay, so this is just a really quick, I just saw like a question coming in from Sindhu, which is a great question, right? So basically it's a concept that I think we kind of skimmed over, but yeah, you can have NFTs that represent a physical item. You could have NFTs that represent a digital item, or you could have NFTs that represent both a physical or digital item, right? In this case, like what we're looking at right now, this could just be a digital item, right? A digital shirt that nobody else, like it doesn't exist in physical form, right? But you have with non-fungible token, this type of blockchain technology, it's uniquely verifiable. It only exists, you know, in a scarce amount, right? Like you're the only one that has it. It could also be that, you know, you have an NFT that's linked to a physical item like title to property of a house, right? Or like the example we were just walking through, it could be representative of a physical shoe and a digital version of the shoe, right? And I'm seeing additional questions coming, which we could talk about, or we could, I don't know if we're on time.
There are a few more in the Q&A as well. So I think I'm going to try to tie a few of them together for you. First question is there always an underlying specifically identifiable asset connected to an NFT?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say yes, but
it doesn't have to be one of one, but yeah, there will definitely be something connected to it. It's verifying your ownership, or yeah, the authenticity of it. So I think actual good example is with NBA Top Shot. If I don't know if there's any one of ones, but if you look closely at the screen, this one's like 29 out of 49. So there could be more than one of your asset. So it just depends on how you define unique, I guess. 49 of them only. So there's some like scarcity there.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Raffi.
Add one piece to that. So like, yeah, you could have a one-to-one, you could have a series of items, or you could have, someone mentioned something, someone in the chat I saw said something about fractionalization. You could also have fractionalized ownership, which then I think starts to get into securities laws questions. But yeah, you could have, say you have a really expensive piece of art or anything, right? And it's just too expensive for anyone to, you know, for a group of friends to own on their own, but collectively they could all own pieces of an NFT, which collectively make up ownership, right? It's almost analogous to like owning stock in something. I think is a good way to kind of think of it. So yeah. I don't know if you had anything to add there, Nareg, but this kind of leads to the value proposition. Well, it's an open question of whether there is one when you're talking about NFTs in general, right? So a great example is these NFT moments of Top Shot, right? And well, first we should probably say like, what is a Top Shot moment, right? And the best analogy is to think of like a digital version of like a baseball trading card, right? So, you know, a baseball trading card, for those who aren't familiar, it's, you know, a player and they have statistics and you know, it's a unique, you have like a unique card, which may be part of a series of cards, and it has value because, you know, it's verifiably scarce. It has some kind of unique name, and or a unique identifier, and an expert can look at it and say like, yes, you know, I believe this isn't counterfeit because like it has this record of existence and so on. So that's what, but like, what is the actual utility of the baseball card? Like people talk about what makes something valuable, and some people say, oh, well, it's like it's utility to it, right? But really it kind of might just be that it's based on what society attributes as being valuable. What are the wants and needs of society, right? That doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one to utility, right? Because what does the baseball card actually do? Nothing. I mean, all it really does is kind of it associates with people because it's verifiably scarce. You own like kind of a piece of the legacy of that player, right? So then now if you jump over to what is an NFT moment, an NFT moment is just kind of the digital version of a baseball card. Instead of being about just about a specific player, it's about a specific moment in time of the player doing something, right? In the case of Top Shot, right? So like this one is like LeBron James performing a dunk, right? And now instead of having verifiable scarcity through an expert looking and identifying the baseball card according to its ruffled edges and whatever unique number it has, instead that verifiability is coming from the cryptographic verifiability of a blockchain, of a non-fungible blockchain, right? So if you accept that a blockchain can create cryptographic verifiability the same way that a baseball card expert can verify a baseball card, then you can say, okay, this moment is scarce. And if that moment's scarce and it owns a piece of a legacy that is valuable, then maybe people will attribute value to it or not, right? And then people also say, oh, well, like this clip of like LeBron James dunking, like I can go on YouTube and I can just pull it up, right? So like, what's the value in me like owning this thing that people can just watch for free? And it's like, well, that image of like Mickey Mantle right there on that baseball card, couldn't you just pull that image up and then print it out and then just very nicely like arrange it in the same type of way as the baseball card and make it exactly, like, for all practical purposes, seem exactly the same? I mean, it's just an open question. This isn't meant to say like, yes, there's this amount of value with NFTs, or no, there isn't this amount of values. But it's just when you start to compare the two of them together, the traditional baseball card with NFT, it kind of just gives you some like food for thought.
And going off of that, I think we have a few questions from the audience here. Someone's asking, can't different people create an NFT for the same Top Shot moment? What's to stop people from creating many such NFTs?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, right? So there is, in this slide, we're kind of talking about, NFT rights and intellectual property rights and ownership verification. And I think it's an ongoing thing that has its challenges, right? So it's true, right? You could take a YouTube and you could just create your own moment, right? But like, would it exist on the same blockchain as the Top Shot moment? No. Would it be cryptographically verifiably the same? No. Does that matter? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? I mean, it's an open question, but the NFT blockchain allows you to have cryptographic verifiable scarcity. It's more difficult to say how to prevent copies from being made in another blockchain, right? And that also leads to, I guess, the question of ownership. When you buy an NFT, right, when you purchase it, like, what does that really mean, right? And really the answer to that kind of depends on the nature of each individual deal, right? Each transaction. People have this misconception that when you buy an NFT, you own it and you can do anything you want with it. But a lot of times that's not necessarily the case. Like with Dapper Labs, for example, and Nareg, correct me if I'm wrong, they put out, I believe, a model licensing agreement for not just for them to use in their Top Shot application, but also for anyone who wants to create and issue NFTs to adopt if they decide to. And basically what that means is that you're not just buying like outright something, the NFT the same way that you buy like, a glass or something, right? You're buying rights that come associated with it. Just like when you download a song, right? Or you from Apple Music, like you have limited rights to what you can do with that song. You can listen to it, you can play it like in a non-commercial setting, but you can't like reap the royalties of that. That goes to the original artist. So all this to say, like each individual NFT transaction, and the platforms that are facilitating these transactions, they're going to have to figure out over time, like what are the specific rights that are associated with purchasing it. And a lot of times it's really just a limited license right now. So yeah, I think we covered everything mostly on this slide. I mean, the last thing is really this talking about how some platforms don't necessarily verify ownership, right? And so that's kind of speaks to what I forget who was asking it, but that's what they were asking, right? Like, who's to say that like you can't, take this thing that's a valuable NFT, like the tweet of Jack Dorsey, for example, and create another NFT that's the tweet of Jack Dorsey, and sell it on another platform, especially these really decentralized platforms where it's difficult for there's to be any one regulator. It's questions that still need to be sorted out. And yeah, so these are kind of more like practical IT challenges. We're already talking about a bunch of problems that NFTs have, so we might as well keep going. So another one might be, this question of, we were talking about how NFTs the content of an NFT doesn't exist on the blockchain, right? It's usually that the blockchain for a non-fungible token points to somewhere else on the internet to where the media exists, right? That's usually a centralized server, right? So if one of those centralized servers that has the media of like LeBron James dunking, for example, goes down, what is the NFT still exists, but like, what do you actually own? There's no longer that image, loading up when you go to the NFT portion of the blockchain that you own. So it's like, what is that worth? What does that mean? And is there any solutions to this, right? So like one thing that's being explored and probably being implemented already is this idea of like decentralized storage, right? And there's some cryptocurrency companies that are working on this, like Protocol Labs. And basically what they do is they, instead of having the information that an NFT points to, and it doesn't have to be an NFT really, it's just storage of any type of data. Instead of it pointing to one central location where the content resides, you have that data split out across a network that can fractionalize the data and create redundancy so that you don't have that one point of failure anymore. And then I think Nareg already spoke to this royalties bit a little bit, but it's really just to reinforce it, is just to say that like when you're dealing with NFTs and especially with like fashion content or media or all these different things, you have a lot of different players. It's not just the person who's minting the NFT and selling it. You have, the server or the servers that are supporting the network. You have the artists, you have the companies that might be involved. It's a lot of complexity with how you distribute the profits. And then say somebody buys the NFT or that buys that limited license, does the original artist continue to get paid out if that person sells the NFT to somebody else? So these are just open questions, but we can keep going unless Nareg, you have anything to add with this.
Just kind of quick. For example, with the NBA Top Shot, Dapper Labs has a licensing agreement with the NBA. So for someone else to take a moment and NFT it and try to sell it, you might get a cease and desist from the NBA. So that's, never fun. And which kind of leads into what we counsel a lot of our clients is if you open up an NFT platform or build one, you might want to vet the art that people submit to get minted. Because you don't want to facilitate basically IP infringement on your platform. So that's kind of a discussion we have with a lot of clients too. But like Raffi said, there are, decentralized exchanges and places where you could NFT anything without anyone stopping you. So that's kind of like a challenge that we're facing.
Right, and I think that goes to one of the audience questions, which was, does the person minting the NFT have to pay a royalty if they're using a Top Shot moment that's publicly available on YouTube? But if I'm understanding you correctly, there are ownership rights in place already, so you couldn't technically do that legally, right?
Yeah, so I mean, just like you can't record an NBA game and like replay it or redistribute it. Just like sometimes during the games you see those ads, it's very similar with this. It's protected by their IP rights, so you wouldn't be able to just even if you sold it and paid the NBA royalty, that's not something they agreed to. So it would kind of be, subject to legal action, I'll say.
Okay, thank you. And As we can see with the slides, we're going to move to the topic of regulation now. And it is a hot topic. We have many, many questions from the audience about SEC oversight, which we're definitely going to get to. So if you could just answer, are there any regulations currently in place for the purchase and sale of NFTs, and are NFTs considered securities, which would subject them to SEC oversight?
Yeah, so I'm sure plenty of people are wondering this because of recent comments from the SEC about cryptocurrencies being a security or not being a security. The fact of the matter is there hasn't been any clear guidance on it. There have been enforcement actions, so we know what a security could look like and could be shut down by the SEC. But when it comes to NFTs, the way they're being used now as art and collectibles, the answer is most likely no. Of course, every lawyer's favorite answer is it depends, because there could be situations where it could be a security. So it's a very fine line that people, attorneys need to watch with their clients. One of the prongs of the Howey test, which the SEC uses to determine whether something is a security or not, is that there's an expectation of profit from a third party, extending managerial efforts. So when you buy a piece of physical art in the real world, you might be buying it because you expect the value to go up, but it's not because you think the artist or the broker or someone else is going to help you market that art piece to be, the best art piece in the world, which is very similar to NFTs. And it's already been sort of determined that external market forces like supply and demand increasing the price without any effort from, the original artist or owner isn't considered profit under the Howey test. So in most cases right now, how, NFTs are traditionally being used, they're probably not a security, but again, that's why there are so many parties out there lobbying and trying to get more clarity from, the SEC and I guess Congress at this point. A place where, there's kind of a gray area and it might cross over more into being a security is if you attach royalty payments to your NFTs and you start selling those rights to the royalties. Raffi spoke about that a little bit, but you can imagine where an artist sells like 100 NFTs, all of them with royalties. So every time they resale, they get 1% or 2% of the proceeds. If they bundle that up together and sell it to an investor, that investor might have expectations that that artist is gonna market their art, continue making art, continue encouraging people to buy and sell their art. So the SEC might view that as crossing the line. It's yet to be seen. I haven't heard of any enforcement actions yet. They're sort of tied up with traditional cryptocurrencies right now, but they'll get around to it for sure. And another thing we discussed was fractionalizing NFTs. How this might cross over into being a security is you could imagine someone selling 40% of 100 pieces, 100 different NFTs, and keeping 60%. Well, those people who are purchasing 40% of the NFT, since the person selling it is still a majority holder of each NFT, they might expect them to put in some effort to make a market for those NFTs, market them as being, the next best thing and trying to increase the price. So that's where the SEC might, get concerned with things. I'd like to preface the next couple slides with, being a corporate attorney, a lot of the times your job is identifying red flags and getting your specialists involved. I know for smaller firms or solo practitioners, it's a little bit more difficult. Thankfully, like at a big law firm, we have people in-house that I could just refer clients to kind of help answer these questions. But the red flag that, we're constantly discussing is, money laundering concerns with the FinCEN. I think beginning on January 1st, the Bank Secrecy Act was amended to include art dealers. So since NFTs are, being compared to art these days. We're kind of counseling our clients to view it under those regulations that would apply. So if a client is minting NFTs or allowing artists to mint NFTs on their platform, and people are buying and selling on there, and the money is going through the platform company, like the client that you're representing, they could be considered a money transmitter. If you're considered a money transmitter, then you're going to be subject to anti-money laundering regulations and implementing those programs to make sure no one is laundering money through your NFTs. So what we've been kind of advising, it is a gray area, so this is more like mitigating risk rather than completely eliminating it, is first trying to use the third party to kind of facilitate the transactions and conduct the KYC and all the other protections that need to be in place. I know Circle kind of provides these services, so it's possible to get in contact with them to get it done. And another thing is having the artist and buyer facilitate payments directly. So if you go and try to use like OpenSea right now, you'll have to have a wallet on some type of crypto wallet that's compatible with their platform. What we advise is that the money from the buyer and the seller, exchange directly, and the company like OpenSea, for example, their payment is just that 2.5% fee that comes to their wallet. So the money, the entire proceeds never really goes through them. It just direct, and 2.5% gets directed towards them.
Great. And one last question for you, Nareg, and someone in the audience posed it, but I know you actually have a slide on it too. What are the tax laws as they relate to NFTs?
Yeah, again, so this is kind of like another specialist area, but from what we understand, kind of in this gray area, new space, is that it's going to be treated the same way kind of art is treated, property in general. So minting an NFT wouldn't be a taxable transaction. Just putting your art up as an NFT, you wouldn't get taxed for that. If you're the actual artist and you're selling NFTs and art pieces and whatnot, then just like an artist painting paintings, it would be considered ordinary income. If you're someone who's purchasing as an investor or just purchasing art because you like it and then it goes up in value and later on you sell it, it's going to be subject to at least capital gains tax, depending on, of course, how long you hold it. If it's over a year, then you get the benefit of the long-term capital gains tax treatment. It is possible that they could be treated as collectibles rather than art. And from my understanding, if you're a high income earner, like over $400,000 a year, there's a extra tax, tacked on there. I think it's a few percent higher than the long-term capital gains tax. So that's something to look out for. Again, tax attorney or accountant would, I would highly advise discussing this with one of them before trying to do it yourself.
Great, thank you. And then now, what I think is going to be a very interesting topic. I know that especially with this being a Young Lawyers Committee panel, a lot of young lawyers and law students want to know how they can potentially get involved in this area of the law. So Raffi, we'll go to you first. Do you have any advice for young lawyers looking to get into this space, or even a more experienced lawyer looking to potentially make a transition?
Sure, yeah. I think it's a really good question. And I think it sounds so, simplistic, but really it's just like, don't be afraid to dive in, because, now that I've been kind of focusing on the space for a few years, I think there's always this, it starts to have like this, I don't know if Nareg, you can relate to this, but there starts to be this assumption that, like, there's so many different things about this area of law that you've always known it or something like that. But really, that's not necessarily the case, right? I mean, it's kind of this iterative knowledge that's developed over time by not being afraid to dive into these topics. So, for me, like I did work in IT prior to and concurrently with going into law school. But I had my undergrad it was a business degree with finance and IT. It wasn't a computer science background or anything like that. I just started focusing on the topic, and for anyone that's still in law school or anything, anytime that I had a class where I needed to write a paper on the legal topic, but it could be whatever subject I wanted, I would just take that legal topic and just throw in blockchain, and then all of a sudden you end up having these questions that you're exploring and answering that just like very rarely have been asked or answered, before that. So you also have the advantage in this space, don't assume that there's experts on all this stuff. Don't even assume that anyone's written about this stuff before or looked into this stuff before, and just dive right in. And that gives you the opportunity to really quickly try to like establish yourself, in the space, and just don't be afraid. I mean, one of the papers I wrote, I got a B on, and ended up getting published, and it ended up, winning like an award. Like you never know, how people are going to interpret the stuff that you're working on, and just don't be discouraged. And then then just going into like law firm life, I just tried to constantly establish myself as like the go-to person for blockchains and NFTs and all this stuff. And even though I had my practice group of IP Lit, I went to every practice group meeting I could that had anything to do with blockchain and cryptocurrency, and I still do this. And a lot of times, the value that I provide is I might not know the law very well because I'm still really new, but I can keep tabs on like what all the different practice groups are doing in relation to blockchain and cryptocurrency, and I'm just a conduit of information. And then on top of that, I'm just constantly sending out, I follow along on some of these news sites, the recent developments in blockchain policy work. Just to name some sites, and specifically like CoinDesk is a really good site. Cointelegraph is a really good site. Decrypt is a really good site. All of these are news outlets that are specifically dedicated to talking about what's going on in blockchain and cryptocurrencies and NFTs and DeFi. And I look at it all the time, if not every day, at least once a week. And the more you read that stuff, the more it's going to kind of get you in hip to like what's going on, what's interesting, what's coming down the pipeline. And it gives you, a leg up on other people in terms of, your knowledge base, and allows you to kind of be first in line for these blockchain crypto assignments when they first come out. And I'd also say just don't be discouraged if the billable work, if you're really like in law firm life and you're trying to get maximum billable work, don't be discouraged if it's not all billable work. Most of the stuff that I did in the beginning, and to an extent even now, it's not necessarily the billable work that's crypto stuff. I do stuff outside of crypto, but like my end goal is always to try to become maximum, crypto focused. Like if it was up for me personally, I want that to be the vast majority of my practice. For other people, maybe they want less, but bottom line is just don't be afraid to dive in. Yeah.
Awesome. We're running into time here, but Nareg, same question to you briefly. Any advice for anyone looking to get to the space?
It's very similar to Raffi's. In law school, I did research and wrote a paper and tried to get that published too. So that's a great way to put on your resume that you're interested in the area. It helps stand out. And then getting work experience. I told Raffi and Dan, like I interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago who entered at Coinbase and Kraken, which are both exchanges. So they are hiring, you could work for a solo practitioner, a small firm that does works on blockchain and cryptocurrency clients. So that's a great way, to get hands-on experience. And Raffi spoke on this too, but as a practicing attorney, I'm sure almost everyone on this call is extremely busy right now. Legal news on crypto and blockchain is developing so quickly. It's very hard for us to keep up. So as a young attorney or law student, if you're able to keep up with it, if you're able to understand it, digest it, make it even write summaries for people, like that's going to put you so far ahead and create so much value. That's like a great way to get into it.
Awesome, thank you. And then briefly before we wrap up, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about Armenia and the perspective for NFTs coming there. So Nareg, if you want to let us know what's going on in Armenia with NFTs, should we expect people to be buying and selling them anytime soon?
Yeah, so I tried to do a little bit of research on this area. There isn't much that I could find. I know there are a couple Armenian artists who have gotten profiled about selling NFTs, but I do know that I guess it's called NUR, is the Armenian Blockchain Association in Armenia. So if you guys are interested in getting more information about them, I think they're active on LinkedIn and have a website and such. They tried putting together a conference from what I understand. I think it happened in 2020. I think the pandemic kind of slowed down things, so hopefully it'll come back soon. But it's great for Armenia. This whole decentralized ecosystem that's growing is because it's an alternative source of income. People are paying for NFTs. There are platforms where you could buy it with US dollars, but most of it is with Ethereum or some type of other crypto. So that's, it moves very quickly. It's very easy for people to handle in Armenia with a computer too. And I kind of wanted to mention plenty of people, Armenians who live across the world, are sending money back to Armenia to help, friends and family. One example where crypto in general can help with this is El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender, and they've estimated that Western Union is going to lose out on $400 million in fees because of this, because Bitcoin is so much cheaper to move internationally. That's something that could, help speed things up and create more, economic opportunities to Armenia. So that's pretty exciting.
Awesome, thank you. We do have a few more questions that we didn't get to. I just want to invite anyone who maybe didn't get their nuanced questions answered to reach out directly to any of us, and also feel free to reach out directly to the ABA as well. There will be a link circulating at the end of this panel via Zoom for any of your feedback, which we'd love to hear. Thank you to everyone so much for joining us. Thank you for being patient through our technical difficulties. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.